She loves her too much, but he only wants a baby. After 15 years, judge said she's not his wife. She collapsed, then doctor said she's pregnant. Hi, my beautiful, precious family. It's your Mr. Peter. I don't come with anything fancy today, just a full heart and a quiet voice. 30,000 of you have stood with me, believed in me and lifted me with your love. And I thank you, not with words, but with the deepest part of my soul. But tonight, I feel something missing. The stories are here, but the silence between us is louder than it's ever been. Views are down, hearts are slipping away, and I wonder, have I lost the light that once brought us together? Still, I refuse to give up on you, because what we've built here is more than videos. It's a bond, a family, a place where broken hearts feel seen, and I pray you still feel that in every line I write. Let me offer you this prayer, my gift to your spirit. I pray peace enters your life like a gentle sunrise, warming even the coldest corners of your heart. That love finds you again, not in grand gestures, but in little mercies that remind you you're not alone. May your soul feel lighter, may your spirit remember its strength, and may your heart rest tonight knowing this: you are needed, you are cherished, and even in your quietest moments, you are so deeply loved. And if this space still matters to you, please like this video and comment. We still love you, Mr. Peter. So I know I'm not writing into silence. I'm writing to someone who still believes. With all my heart, always, your Mr. Peter.
They say love strikes like lightning, sudden, brilliant, and impossible to predict. But for Chad Norman, love didn't strike at all. It walked into his carefully controlled world wearing a $20 dress and shattered his billion-dollar beliefs with two simple words: hell no. The champagne glass slipped from his fingers, crystal exploding against Italian marble like his composure. Around him, Miami's most powerful elite held their breath, watching the untouchable billionaire experience something he'd never encountered before: rejection. "I'm sorry, Mr. Norman," Melita Cyril said, her voice carrying the warmth of Caribbean sunshine and the strength of hurricane winds. "But your money can't buy what these children need." Chad Norman had conquered Wall Street before his 25th birthday. He owned skyscrapers that pierced the Miami sky like steel monuments to his success. Presidents called him for advice, and supermodels called him for dates. Yet here he stood, speechless, staring at a woman who had just refused his $50,000 donation as if he'd offered her pocket change. She was nothing like the women in his world. No designer gowns, no perfectly sculpted faces, no calculated smiles hiding calculating hearts. Melita Cyril stood before him in a simple black dress that hugged her curves without trying to seduce, her natural hair crowned like a halo of midnight silk. Her dark eyes held depths he'd never seen before, not the shallow pools of ambition that reflected back at him from every mirror in his world, but oceans of genuine compassion that seemed to pierce straight through his armor. "Excuse me?" Chad's voice came out rougher than intended, his legendary composure cracking like ice in the Florida heat. "You heard me." Melita stepped closer, and Chad caught the scent of vanilla and something indefinably sweet. Not the expensive perfumes he was used to, but something real, something that made his chest tighten unexpectedly. $50,000 won't change these children's lives. You want to throw money at a problem and walk away feeling good about yourself. That's not charity, Mr. Norman. That's buying indulgences. The ballroom around them seemed to fade away. Chad was vaguely aware of whispered conversations, of cell phones discreetly recording what would undoubtedly become Miami's most talked-about social media moment. But all he could focus on was the fire in this woman's eyes, a fire that wasn't burning for him, his money, or his power. It was burning for something else entirely. "Then what do you suggest?" he heard himself ask, his voice barely above a whisper. Melita's lips curved into a smile that could have powered the entire ballroom. "Get your hands dirty. Show up. Be present. Love them." She paused, her eyes searching his face as if she were looking for something he wasn't sure he possessed. "But I don't think you know how to do that, do you?" The question hit him like a physical blow. Chad Norman, who had never backed down from a challenge, who had built his empire on the principle that everything and everyone had a price, found himself utterly disarmed, not by aggression or manipulation, tactics he could handle, but by something far more dangerous. Truth. He began, then stopped. For the first time in his adult life, Chad Norman had nothing to say. "Dance with me," he said suddenly, the words tumbling out before his brain could stop them. Melita raised an eyebrow, a gesture so perfectly skeptical it made his heart skip. "I just insulted your entire approach to charity, and you want to dance?" "You fascinate me," Chad admitted, his usual calculated charm replaced by raw honesty. "I've never met anyone who looked at me the way you do." "And how do I look at you?" "Like I'm just a man." The silence stretched between them, charged with possibility. Around them, the orchestra played on. Couples swayed to the rhythm of wealth and privilege, but Chad felt as if he and Melita existed in their own bubble, separate from the world he'd always known. "One dance," Melita said finally, her voice soft enough that he had to lean closer to hear her. "But I'm warning you, Mr. Norman. I don't dance to anyone's tune but my own." Chad extended his hand, and when her fingers touched his, he felt electricity shoot through his entire body. Her skin was warm, soft, and entirely free of the cold calculation he was used to. As they moved onto the dance floor, he realized that every woman he'd ever held had felt like a chess piece in his game of life. Melita felt like the board itself, the foundation upon which everything else could be built. They moved together with an effortless grace that surprised them both. Chad, who had learned ballroom dancing as a corporate necessity, found himself truly dancing for the first time. Melita, who had expected awkward fumbling from a man who probably bought his way out of every uncomfortable situation, discovered that Chad Norman moved like poetry in motion. "You're not what I expected," she murmured against his ear, her breath sending shivers down his spine. "What did you expect? A cold, calculating businessman who sees people as profit margins." Chad spun her expertly, pulling her back into his arms with a move that made her heart flutter, despite her best efforts. "What if I told you that's exactly what I am?" "Then I'd say you're a liar," Melita replied, her eyes meeting his with unflinching directness. "Cold men don't dance like they're making love to music, and calculating men don't ask questions they're afraid to hear the answers to." They danced through 3 songs, neither willing to break the spell that had wrapped around them. Chad found himself sharing things he'd never told anyone. His fear of becoming like his father, his loneliness despite being surrounded by people, his secret dream of teaching children instead of conquering markets. Melita, in turn, told him about her work with foster children, her belief that love could heal any wound, her certainty that people were inherently good if given the chance to be. "I have a confession," Chad said as the final notes of the 3rd song faded away. "I've never believed in love." Melita's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't pull away. "Never. I've seen desire, obsession, convenience, transaction. But love?" He shook his head. "I always thought it was something people convinced themselves of to make loneliness bearable." "And now?" Chad's hands tightened on her waist, and he looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Now I'm wondering if I've been wrong about everything." The evening dissolved around them like sugar in rain. They talked until the ballroom emptied, until the staff began cleaning up, until the sun painted the Miami sky in shades of pink and gold. They moved to the hotel's garden, where palm trees swayed in the ocean breeze, and night-blooming jasmine filled the air with its intoxicating scent. "I should go," Melita said finally, though every part of her wanted to stay. "Should," Chad repeated, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her hand. "But do you want to?" She looked up at him, this man who had somehow become the most important person in her world in the span of a single night. "No," she whispered. "I don't want to go. I want to stay here with you and pretend that fairy tales are real." Chad lifted her chin with his finger, his gray eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her knees weak. "What if they are? What if everything I thought I knew about life was wrong, and everything you believe about love is right?" "Then we're both in trouble," Melita said, her voice barely audible. "The best kind of trouble," Chad murmured, and then he kissed her. It was nothing like the calculated kisses he'd shared with other women. Those had been moves in a game, strategies designed to achieve specific outcomes. This kiss was pure feeling, raw and desperate, and entirely outside his control. Melita tasted like hope and possibility, like everything he'd never known he was missing. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and shaking, Chad rested his forehead against hers. "I'm falling in love with you," he said, the words tumbling out with a honesty that terrified him. "I know it's crazy, I know it's too fast, but I can't help it." Melita's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, Chad thought he'd ruined everything. Then she smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through storm clouds. "I'm falling too," she whispered, "and it's the most beautiful kind of crazy I've ever experienced." 3 months later, Chad Norman, the man who had sworn he would never be vulnerable to anyone, knelt in that same garden with a ring he'd designed himself and a heart overflowing with devotion. And Melita Cyril, the woman who had always believed in fairy tales, said yes to her prince, not because he was rich or powerful, but because he had learned to cherish with the same intensity he'd once used to conquer the world. Chapter 2. Building Dreams in Paradise. Some weddings are performances designed to impress guests and satisfy society's expectations. Others are sacred ceremonies that bind two souls together for eternity. Chad Norman and Melita Cyril's wedding was a revolution, a stunning rebellion against everything both their worlds had taught them about devotion, race, and what was supposed to be impossible. The morning of their wedding dawned with golden Miami sunshine. Chad stood in his four-season suite, hands shaking as he attempted to knot his tie for the 7th time. Vincent Norman had refused to attend, calling the marriage a career-ending mistake. The words still echoed in Chad's mind, but for the first time in his life, he didn't care about his father's approval. "Need help with that?" Christy Woolard appeared in the doorway, becoming an unlikely ally over the past 3 months, though she'd made it clear that if he ever hurt Melita, she'd personally ensure he regretted it. "I've tied 1,000 ties," Chad muttered. "Why won't this one cooperate?" "Because you're not just getting dressed, you're transforming," Christy said, fixing his tie with practiced efficiency. The man who could manipulate board meetings is terrified of promising forever to a woman who sees through all his masks. "What if I'm not enough for her?" "Then you'll spend every day learning how to become him," Christy replied. "That's what devotion is. Not being perfect, but being willing to grow." Across the hotel, Melita sat surrounded by her chosen family. Isabella Cruz wept happy tears as she fastened the pearl necklace that had belonged to Melita's grandmother. The dress was ivory silk that flowed like water, with delicate lace sleeves Melita had designed herself. "Mija, are you sure about this?" Isabella whispered in Spanish. Melita's dark eyes shone with absolute certainty. "Mama, I have never been more sure. Chad isn't perfect, but he cherishes me with everything he has, and I adore him enough to help him heal." The ceremony took place in the hotel's oceanfront garden, where white roses created an altar between sea and sky. Chad had incorporated Melita's Puerto Rican heritage into every detail. Mariachi music, unity candles, reception food featuring her grandmother's recipes. When Melita began her walk down the aisle, Chad forgot how to breathe. She moved toward him like a vision, her natural beauty enhanced but never masked. Her smile undid him entirely, radiant, certain, and full of pure affection. When vows came, Chad's voice shook as he spoke. Melita, 6 months ago I thought devotion was weakness. Then you shattered every wall I'd built around my heart. You fell in love with the man I could become. Today I promise to choose compassion over ambition, connection over control, and you over everything else, always. Then Chad switched to Spanish, the language he'd secretly learned with Isabella's help. Te prometo mi corazón, mi alma y mi futuro. Eres el amor de mi vida. Melita's tears flowed as she realized what he'd done. This powerful man had humbled himself to learn her mother's language. Her vows rang clear across the garden. Chad, you came like a storm, powerful and overwhelming. But I wasn't seeking temporary passion. I was seeking peace, the calm when souls recognize home. You are my peace, my home, my heart. I promise to cherish you through darkness and celebrate you in light. I choose you not because you're perfect, but because you're perfectly mine. Their wedding kiss was tender and passionate. Chad spun Melita as guests erupted in cheers. Mrs. Norman, he whispered. Mrs. Cyril Norman, she corrected with a smile. I'm keeping my name too. The reception celebrated authentic joy rather than extravagance. Chad surprised everyone by taking salsa lessons, stumbling through steps with determined enthusiasm that charmed even skeptical guests. During his speech, Chad looked at their diverse community of friends and family. 3 months ago, I measured worth in dollars and power. Tonight, I realize success isn't what you acquire. It's what you're willing to sacrifice for devotion. My wife didn't just marry me. She saved me. Their Bali honeymoon was everything they dreamed. Chad rented a private villa overlooking the ocean, but their treasured moments weren't luxurious. Sunrise conversations, cooking with local families, and planting a mango tree in the garden. Make a wish, Melita said as they planted the sapling. I wish for this tree to grow strong, just like our devotion, Chad replied. What if we never return to see it grown? Then we'll plant another wherever we are, Chad said, pulling her close, until we have a whole orchard of promises. In Bali, Chad finally opened up about his childhood. Sitting on their terrace watching sunset, Melita asked about his father. Vincent built his empire through intimidation, Chad said quietly. Affection was never part of the equation. When I was 8, I cried because he missed my school play. He made me stand in his office for 3 hours listing every successful man who'd achieved greatness by putting business before feelings. Oh, Chad. I swore I'd never let anyone have that power over me again. Then you smiled at me and I understood why people write poetry about falling in love. You made me want to tear down my own walls. They made love that night with transcendent tenderness. Every touch was a promise, every kiss a vow to heal life's wounds. Chad whispered devotion in both languages, while Melita showed him he was worthy of every emotion he'd been taught to fear. On their last morning, Chad announced a decision. I'm starting therapy when we get home. I want to break the cycle, Melita. I want to be the kind of father our children will run to, not away from. Melita's hands shook. Our children? I want everything with you, Chad said, taking her hands. Marriage, family, growing old together. I want it all with you. Tears streamed down her face as she launched into his arms. Yes to all of it. Yes to forever. Yes to the most magnificent life we can build together. Flying back to Miami, Chad held Melita's hand and made a silent promise. He would become the man she believed he could be. He would cherish her with the intensity he'd once reserved for conquest. The greatest success of his life was sleeping against his shoulder, dreaming of their future. The mango tree would grow strong and tall, providing shade for other lovers making promises. But Chad and Melita carried their own seeds of devotion back to Miami, ready to plant a garden of dreams that would bloom forever. Chapter 3. The Garden of Endless Hope. 5 years of marriage had transformed Chad Norman from a man who measured everything in profit margins to someone who counted his wealth in morning kisses and midnight conversations. Their Coral Gables mansion, once a cold monument to success, had become a sanctuary of love, where laughter echoed through marble halls, and every room held memories of their deepening bond. "Close your eyes," Chad whispered against Melita's ear as he guided her through their backyard garden on a warm Saturday morning in May. The scent of jasmine and orange blossoms filled the air, while butterflies danced among the hibiscus flowers that Melita had planted in their second year of marriage. "Chad Norman, if you're about to show me another ridiculously expensive gift that I've told you I don't need," Melita began, but her protest was cut short by his gentle laughter. "Not expensive," he murmured, his hands warm on her shoulders as he positioned her carefully. "Priceless. Open your eyes, mi amor." Melita's breath caught as she opened her eyes to discover that their garden had been completely transformed overnight. Where once there had been a simple patio, now stood an exact replica of the gazebo from their wedding in Bali, down to the white roses and baby's breath that had decorated their altar. But it was the small placard at the entrance that made her heart stop. "The Dreaming Place, where future Cyril Normans will play." "Chad," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I know we've been trying for a year," he said softly, his arms encircling her from behind. "I know the doctors say there's nothing wrong, that we just need to be patient. But I wanted you to have a place where you could come and dream about our babies, talk to them, let them know how much we already love them." Tears streamed down Melita's face as she turned in his arms. Chad had been attending therapy religiously for 3 years now, and the man who once solved every problem with money had learned to offer something far more precious: his emotional presence, his vulnerability, his unwavering support during the hardest moments. "I love you so much it actually hurts sometimes," she said, standing on her tiptoes to kiss him with all the passion 5 years of marriage hadn't dimmed. "How did I get so lucky?" "I ask myself that question every morning when I wake up next to you," Chad replied, his forehead resting against hers. "Especially on the mornings when you're stealing all the covers and talking in your sleep about teaching our future children to salsa dance." Melita laughed, the sound bright and musical in the morning air. "You were listening to that? I listen to everything you say, awake or asleep. It's all music to me." Their 5th anniversary had been a celebration not just of their love, but of the people they'd become together. Chad had surprised Melita by arranging for them to return to Bali, where their mango tree had grown tall and strong, its branches heavy with golden fruit. They'd made love under its shade, both of them crying happy tears as they remembered the young couple who had planted it with such hope and certainty. But it was during that trip that they'd decided it was time to start their family. The conversation had happened naturally as they watched a group of local children playing on the beach, their laughter mixing with the sound of waves. "I want that," Melita had said softly, her hand finding Chad's. "I want to watch our children discover the world with that same wonder." Chad had pulled her closer, his own eyes following the children as they built elaborate sandcastles. "I used to think I was too damaged to be a good father. Now I think maybe all that healing I've done was preparing me to love our children the way I should have been loved." They'd started trying as soon as they returned from Bali, approaching the journey with the same joy and intentionality they brought to everything else in their marriage. Chad had thrown himself into preparing for fatherhood with the same intensity he'd once reserved for business deals, reading every parenting book he could find, taking cooking classes so he could make healthy meals for Melita during pregnancy, even practicing diaper changes on Christie's baby nephew, until he could do it blindfolded. The gazebo quickly became their sacred space. Every morning, Chad would bring Melita her coffee there, and they'd spend 20 minutes just talking about their dreams, their fears, their absolute certainty that they were meant to be parents together. Chad had commissioned a local artist to create wind chimes that played a lullaby when the breeze caught them just right, and Melita had planted a small herb garden nearby so their future children could learn to grow their own food. "I have something for you," Melita said one evening as they sat in the gazebo watching the sunset. She pulled out a small leather-bound journal and placed it in Chad's hands. "What's this?" "Open it." The first page was covered in Melita's elegant handwriting, "Letters to our future miracles." Chad's throat tightened as he realized what she'd given him. "I started writing to them," Melita explained, her voice soft with emotion. "To our babies, whoever they are, wherever they are, waiting to come to us. I thought, maybe you'd want to write to them too." Chad's hands shook as he turned the pages, reading Melita's beautiful words to their unborn children, promises of bedtime stories and scraped-knee kisses, descriptions of the love that was already waiting for them, dreams of Christmas mornings and first days of school. "My darling ones," he read aloud from one of her entries, "your papa is the strongest, kindest man I've ever known. He's learning to believe in magic because he wants to teach you that anything is possible when you lead with love." "Melita," Chad whispered, unable to continue reading through his tears. "I know it might seem silly." "It's not silly," Chad interrupted, pulling her into his lap. "It's the most beautiful thing anyone has ever given me. Will you help me write my first letter?" That night, they sat curled together in their bed, Chad's large hand covering Melita's smaller one as they wrote their first joint letter to their future children. "My precious miracles, we are writing this on a Tuesday in October, 5 years after we promised to love each other forever. We don't know your names yet, or what you'll look like, or whether you'll have your mama's compassion or your papa's stubborn streak, probably both. But we know that you are already so loved, so wanted, so cherished that our hearts feel too small to contain it all." The months that followed were filled with hope and anticipation, but also with the growing pressure that comes when dreams don't materialize on the timeline your heart expects. Other couples in their social circle seemed to get pregnant effortlessly, and Melita found herself fighting waves of inadequacy every time another baby announcement appeared on social media. Chad, sensing her struggle, began planning elaborate surprises designed to remind her that their love was complete, exactly as it was. He arranged for them to take salsa dancing lessons together, laughing as he fumbled through steps that came naturally to Melita. He surprised her with weekend trips to small towns where they could pretend to be ordinary people living ordinary lives. He learned to cook her grandmother's recipes so perfectly that Isabella wept the first time she tasted his arroz con pollo. "You don't have to keep trying to distract me from the fact that I'm not pregnant," Melita said one evening as Chad presented her with tickets to a wine-tasting tour through Napa Valley. "I'm not trying to distract you," Chad replied, sitting beside her on their couch and taking her hands in his. "I'm trying to remind you that you're the love of my life, with or without children. I'm trying to show you that every day with you is a gift I don't take for granted. But you want children so much." "I want you," Chad interrupted, his voice fierce with conviction. "I want our life together. I want to grow old with you and argue about whose turn it is to take out the trash. If children are part of that future, then I'll love them with everything I have. If they're not, then I'll love you with everything I have times 2. Either way, I win because I get you." Melita fell into his arms, overwhelmed by the depth of his commitment. "How are you so perfect?" "I'm not perfect," Chad laughed, holding her close. "I still put empty milk cartons back in the refrigerator, and I can't remember to replace the toilet paper roll to save my life. But I love you perfectly, and that's all that matters." It was during their 6th year of marriage that Chad made a discovery that changed everything. Melita had been in court all day working on a particularly difficult custody case, and Chad had come home early to surprise her with dinner. As he was setting the table, he noticed the journal of letters to their future children sitting open on the kitchen counter. Unable to resist, he flipped through the pages, rereading some of his favorite entries. But toward the back, he found pages he'd never seen before, pages where Melita had been pouring out her deepest fears and insecurities. "What if I'm not meant to be a mother?" one entry read. "What if my body is broken in some way the doctors can't see? What if I'm being punished for some mistake I don't even remember making?" Chad's heart shattered as he read his wife's private anguish. Here he'd been planning romantic distractions while she'd been drowning in self-doubt, and she'd hidden it all behind her usual bright smile and unwavering optimism. When Melita walked through the door that evening, exhausted from her long day, she found Chad sitting in their gazebo with the journal in his hands, and tears streaming down his face. "Chad, what's wrong? Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice broken. "Why didn't you tell me how much you were hurting?" Melita's face crumpled as she realized what he'd read. "I didn't want to burden you with my doubts. You've been so positive, so supportive." "Melita, listen to me." Chad stood and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could feel his heartbeat against her cheek. "Your doubts are my doubts. Your pain is my pain. Your fears are ours to face together. Don't you dare carry this alone." They stayed in the gazebo until the stars came out, talking through every fear, every hope, every possibility their future might hold. Chad shared his own secret worry that his damaged childhood might have somehow passed on a genetic inability to create life. Melita confessed her terror that wanting something so badly might somehow push it further away. "What if we're trying too hard?" she whispered against his chest. "What if we need to just live our lives and trust that what's meant to happen will happen?" "Then that's what we'll do," Chad said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "We'll live every day like it's a gift, love each other like it's the only job that matters, and trust that our story is being written by someone who loves us even more than we love each other." The next morning, Chad surprised Melita by adding a new tradition to their daily routine. Instead of spending their gazebo time talking about future children, they began dedicating those 20 minutes to celebrating their present life together. They shared favorite memories, planned new adventures, and reminded each other of all the ways their love had already exceeded their wildest dreams. "Today I'm grateful for the way you hum while you're cooking," Chad would say. "Today I'm grateful for how you still open car doors for me, even though we've been married 6 years," Melita would respond. It was this shift from focusing on what they didn't have to celebrating what they did that finally allowed them to find peace in the journey. They stopped tracking ovulation cycles and started planning trips. They stopped avoiding baby showers and started attending them with genuine joy for their friends. They stopped seeing other people's pregnancies as evidence of their own failure and started viewing them as proof that miracles happen when the time is right. And it was in this space of acceptance and gratitude that Chad made another discovery, one that would stay secret in his heart for years to come. Hidden in his bedside drawer was his own private journal, one that Melita didn't know about. In it, he'd been writing his own letters to their future children, but also documenting every moment of beauty in their current life. "Today your mama laughed so hard at my attempt to make pancakes that she snorted coffee through her nose," read one entry. "I hope you inherit her laugh. It's the most beautiful sound in the world." "Your mama started a foundation today to help other couples struggling with fertility," read another. "She's turning her pain into purpose, her longing into love for others. I hope you inherit her strength." As Chad closed the journal and prepared for bed, listening to Melita singing softly in the shower, He realized that their journey to parenthood had already made them better people. Whether children came next month or next year or never at all, they had built something beautiful in the waiting, a love so deep and strong that it could weather any storm, overcome any disappointment, and find joy in any circumstance. Their garden of hope was blooming exactly as it should. Chapter 4. When Shadows Return. The envelope arrived on their 10th anniversary like a serpent slithering into paradise. Chad found it slipped under his office door at Norman Industries, his father's corporate letterhead stark and ominous against cream-colored paper. For a moment, he considered throwing it away unopened. 10 years of therapy had taught him that not every message from Vincent Norman deserved a response. But something about the timing, the deliberate cruelty of delivering it, on the day he and Melita were celebrating a decade of marriage, made his hands shake as he broke the seal. "Chad," the letter began in his father's cold, precise handwriting, "your little experiment in domesticity has gone on long enough. 10 years of marriage without producing an heir is not just embarrassing, it's a dereliction of duty. You have 1 year to get your wife pregnant and secure the Norman legacy, or I will remove you from the company and disinherit you completely. Don't test me on this. You know I always follow through on my threats. Vincent Norman, chairman of the board." Chad read the letter 3 times before the words fully penetrated his consciousness. His father, who had been notably absent from their wedding, their anniversary celebrations, and every milestone of their marriage, was now attempting to control the most intimate aspect of their lives. The man who had taught Chad that love was weakness was demanding proof of that love in the form of an heir. "Sir?" His assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Mrs. Cyril Norman is here for your lunch appointment." Chad quickly shoved the letter into his desk drawer, forcing his face into a smile as Melita entered his office carrying a picnic basket and wearing the sundress he'd bought her in Bali. She looked radiant, her skin glowing with happiness as she set up their anniversary lunch on the small table by his office window. "Happy 10 years, my love," she said, standing on her tiptoes to kiss him. But as their lips met, she pulled back with a frown. "You're tense. What's wrong?" Chad wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her close and burying his face in her neck to avoid her perceptive gaze. "Nothing's wrong. Just thinking about how lucky I am to be married to the most beautiful woman in Miami." "Chad." Melita's voice carried the gentle firmness that meant she wasn't going to be distracted by compliments. "I've been reading your moods for 10 years. Something upset you. What is it?" For a moment, Chad considered telling her about the letter. They'd built their marriage on radical honesty, on the principle that they could face anything together. But as he looked at her face, bright with anniversary joy, free from the stress lines that had appeared during their struggles with fertility, he couldn't bring himself to shatter her happiness with his father's poison. "Just work stress," he said, hating himself for the lie. "The quarterly reports are due next week, and the board is being particularly demanding." Melita studied his face for a long moment, and Chad held his breath, certain she would see through his deception. But then she smiled and began unpacking their lunch, all of his favorite foods that she'd prepared herself despite her busy schedule at the family foundation. "Then let's not talk about work," she said. "Today is about us, about celebrating how far we've come and dreaming about where we're going next." They spent the next hour reminiscing about their favorite memories, their first dance, their wedding in Bali, the morning Chad had surprised her with the gazebo. But beneath Chad's laughter and loving responses, Vincent's words echoed like a death sentence. "You have 1 year." That evening, they celebrated their anniversary at the same restaurant where Chad had proposed, a small, intimate place that served Melita's grandmother's recipes and where the owner still remembered their first nervous dinner together. Chad had reserved their original table, complete with the same flowers and candles from that magical night 10 years ago. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night?" Melita asked as they shared dessert, her fingers intertwined with his across the table. "I said a lot of things that night," Chad replied, his thumb tracing circles on her hand. "Most of them involved me trying to convince you I was worth a second chance." "You said that you'd never believed in forever until you met me," Melita said softly. "You promised that if I gave you my heart, you'd spend the rest of your life proving you deserved it." Chad's chest tightened with emotion and guilt. "And? Have I kept that promise?" "Every single day," Melita whispered, leaning across the table to kiss him. "You've loved me through my doubts, my fears, my crazy work schedule, and my tendency to cry at dog food commercials. You've been patient with our journey to parenthood, supportive of my career, and gentle with my heart even when yours was breaking too." "Melita, I'm not finished," she said with a smile. "10 years ago, I thought I was just marrying the man I loved. I didn't realize I was also marrying my best friend, my greatest supporter, my safe place in every storm. You've exceeded every dream I had about what marriage could be." Chad felt tears burning behind his eyes as he listened to his wife's words. Here she was, praising him for being the husband she deserved, while he sat across from her harboring a secret that could destroy everything they'd built together. "I love you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "More than my next breath, more than my own life." "I love you too," Melita replied, "and I have something for you." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small wrapped box, her eyes dancing with excitement. "It's not much, but I wanted you to have something that would remind you of us, wherever you are." Chad unwrapped the gift with trembling fingers, revealing a vintage pocket watch with their wedding photo engraved on the inside cover. Below the photo, in Melita's careful script, were the words, "Time stands still when I'm with you." "Melita." Chad's voice broke as he stared at the watch, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gift and the timing of its arrival on the same day his father had delivered his ultimatum. "Do you like it?" "I love it," Chad whispered, standing to pull her into his arms right there in the middle of the restaurant. "I love you so much it scares me sometimes." "Good scared or bad scared?" Melita asked, her arms tightening around his neck. "Good scared," Chad lied, pressing his face into her hair. "The kind of scared that comes from having everything you've ever wanted and knowing how precious it is." They made love that night with the desperate passion of newlyweds, but Chad couldn't shake the feeling that he was memorizing every touch, every sigh, every whispered endearment. Vincent's letter had awakened something dark and familiar in his chest, the old fear that happiness was temporary, that love was conditional, that everything beautiful in his life would eventually be taken away. Over the following weeks, Chad found himself checking the pocket watch obsessively, as if the ticking hands could somehow slow down the countdown his father had imposed. He began working longer hours, telling Melita he was preparing for a major expansion, when really he was trying to distance himself from the love that made Vincent's threats so terrifying. The panic attack started 3 weeks after the letter arrived. Chad would be in the middle of a meeting or a phone call when suddenly his chest would tighten, his vision would blur, and his breathing would become shallow and rapid. He managed to hide them from everyone, including Melita, by stepping out for important calls or claiming he needed to review documents in private. But Melita wasn't fooled for long. She began noticing the changes, how Chad startled when she touched him unexpectedly, how he stared into space during dinner conversations, how he held her a little too tightly when they were in bed, as if he was afraid she might disappear. "Chad, you're having panic attacks," she said one evening after finding him hyperventilating in their garage after a particularly bad episode. "I can see all the signs. What's causing them?" "I'm fine," Chad insisted, straightening his shirt and trying to regulate his breathing. Just work stress. The expansion project is more complicated than I anticipated. This isn't about work, Melita said firmly. You've handled billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat. Something else is going on, and I need you to talk to me. Chad looked at his wife. Beautiful, trusting, completely unprepared for the poison his father was threatening to inject into their lives, and felt his resolve weaken. It's nothing you need to worry about. I'll handle it. We'll handle it, Melita corrected. That's what marriage means, Chad. We face everything together, remember? But Chad was already retreating into the emotional fortress he'd spent years in therapy learning to dismantle. Vincent's letter had awakened every childhood survival instinct, every lesson about protecting himself by keeping others at arm's length. The voice in his head, his father's voice, was getting louder every day. Love makes you weak. Emotion makes you vulnerable. The only way to protect what matters is to control everything and trust no one. Some things are better handled alone, Chad said, his voice taking on a coldness that made Melita step back in shock. Chad, what did you just say to me? The look of hurt confusion on her face should have snapped Chad back to his senses, should have reminded him that Melita was his partner, not his enemy. Instead, it triggered a memory of being 8 years old and watching his father berate his mother for interfering in business matters. The parallels weren't real, but trauma doesn't deal in logic. It deals in terror and self-preservation. I said I'll handle it, Chad repeated, his voice growing colder with each word. Not everything requires a committee discussion. Melita recoiled as if he'd slapped her. In 10 years of marriage, Chad had never spoken to her with such dismissive contempt. Who are you right now? Because you're not the man I married. Maybe the man you married was pretending to be someone he wasn't, Chad heard himself say, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. Maybe you married an illusion. The silence that followed was deafening. Chad watched the color drain from Melita's face, saw the exact moment when hurt transformed into something harder and more defensive. If that's true, she said quietly, then I guess we both married illusions. Because the man I thought I married would never speak to me like that. She turned and walked back into the house, leaving Chad alone in the garage with the echo of his own cruelty. He wanted to follow her, to fall to his knees and beg her forgiveness, to explain about the letter and his father's threats. But Vincent's voice was stronger now, whispering that showing weakness would only make things worse, that the only way to protect their marriage was to handle the situation himself. That night they went to bed without speaking, lying side by side like strangers. Chad stared at the ceiling, listening to Melita's carefully controlled breathing and knowing she was awake too. He reached for her hand in the darkness, but she pulled away, the first time in their marriage she'd ever rejected his touch. Melita, he whispered. Not tonight, she said softly. I can't pretend everything is okay when you're lying to me about something that's clearly destroying you. Chad lay awake until dawn, his father's pocket watch ticking like a time bomb on the nightstand beside him. 6 weeks had passed since the letter arrived. He had 10.5 months to figure out how to save his marriage, his family, and the empire he'd worked so hard to build. But with each passing day, the pressure was transforming him back into the man he'd been before Melita, cold, calculating, and convinced that love was a luxury he couldn't afford. The therapy sessions he'd attended religiously for years suddenly seemed naive. The emotional growth he'd achieved felt fragile and temporary. Vincent Norman's poison was working, seeping into the cracks of Chad's psyche and widening them into chasms. The man who had learned to love without reservation was slowly remembering how to survive without feeling. And Melita, watching her husband retreat into himself day by day, began to wonder if the fairy tale she'd believed in for 10 years was finally coming to an end. Chapter 5. The Slow Poison of Fear. 3 months after Vincent's ultimatum, Chad Norman had become a stranger in his own life. The man who once brought Melita coffee in bed every morning now left for work before dawn, claiming urgent meetings that didn't exist. The husband who used to text her love notes throughout the day now went hours without responding to her messages. Melita stood at their bedroom window on a rainy Thursday morning, watching Chad's Mercedes disappear down their driveway for the third time this week, before she'd even had her first cup of coffee. In her hands, she clutched the journal they'd once filled together with letters to their future children, pages that now felt like artifacts from a happier life. "Where did you go?" she whispered to the empty room. "Where is the man who promised to choose love over fear?" The changes had been gradual at first, so subtle that Melita had almost convinced herself she was imagining them. Chad still said he loved her, still held her when she cried over another negative pregnancy test, still remembered to buy her favorite flowers every Friday. But there was a distance in his eyes now, a careful control in his touch that felt more like obligation than desire. It was Christy who finally forced Melita to confront what was happening. "He's having an affair," her best friend said bluntly during their weekly lunch. "I'm sorry to be the one to tell you, but the signs are all there: working late, emotional distance, guilt manifesting as random gifts." "Chad would never," Melita began, but the protest died in her throat. Would he? The man she'd married wouldn't, but this new version of Chad was capable of things that would have been unthinkable 6 months ago. "Mel, honey, you're not seeing clearly," Christy continued. "He's been different since your anniversary. Something happened that night. Think, was there anything unusual?" Melita closed her eyes, forcing herself to remember. Chad had been tense during their anniversary lunch, distracted despite his efforts to hide it. He'd claimed it was work stress, but what kind of work stress would hit on their anniversary and never resolve? "I need to check his phone," she said suddenly. That evening, Melita waited until Chad was in the shower before grabbing his phone. Her hands shook as she scrolled through messages, emails, and call logs, searching for evidence of another woman. But what she found was somehow worse. She found nothing. No mysterious numbers, no deleted threads, no unexplained absences. Chad wasn't having an affair. He was simply disappearing, withdrawing so completely that he might as well have been having an emotional affair with his own isolation. When Chad emerged from the bathroom, Melita was pretending to read a magazine. He moved around their bedroom like a ghost, going through his nighttime routine without acknowledging her presence. "Chad," she said softly, "we need to talk." "About what?" His voice was polite but distant. "About us. About what's happening to our marriage." Chad went very still beside her. "Nothing's happening to our marriage." "You barely touch me anymore unless it's to try to get me pregnant," Melita said, her voice steadier than she felt. "You leave before I wake up and come home after I've gone to bed. When we do talk, it feels like you're reading from a script. You're being dramatic." The dismissive response hit Melita like a physical blow. Chad had never, in 10 years of marriage, dismissed her feelings as dramatic. "Dramatic?" she repeated, sitting up to face him. "Chad, look at me. Really, look at me." Reluctantly, Chad turned his head, and Melita gasped at what she saw in his eyes. They were empty, not angry or cold, but completely vacant, as if the man she loved had simply vacated his own body. "Where are you?" she whispered, reaching out to touch his face. Chad caught her wrist before her fingers could make contact. "I'm right here." "No, you're not. You're somewhere else, somewhere I can't reach you. Please, baby, talk to me. Whatever's wrong, we can fix it together." For a moment, Chad's mask slipped, and Melita saw a flash of the agony he was carrying, fear so deep and raw it took her breath away. But then the walls slammed back into place. "Nothing's wrong that time won't fix," he said, rolling over. "Just give me some space to work through things." "What things?" "Chad, You're scaring me. I'm not discussing this anymore tonight. We both have early mornings. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in marital deterioration. Chad found fault with everything: the way Melita loaded the dishwasher, her choice of restaurants, her tendency to leave books around the house. These weren't playful complaints, they were calculated attacks designed to create distance. "Your hair is blocking the bathroom drain again," he said one morning, his voice sharp with disproportionate irritation. "I'll clean it out," Melita offered, but Chad was already pushing past her. "Forget it. I'll do it myself. It's faster than explaining how to do it properly." The casual cruelty, the implication that she was too incompetent to clean a drain, left Melita speechless. This was the same man who had once told her that watching her brush her teeth was one of his favorite parts of the day. Isabella noticed the change during Sunday dinner, where Chad sat silent and distant while Melita tried to maintain normal conversation. "Mijo," Isabella said gently, "you seem troubled. Is everything all right?" "Work is fine," Chad replied curtly. "Just busy." "And the marriage? You and my daughter, you are happy?" Chad's jaw tightened. "Of course we're happy. Why would you ask that?" "Because she cries in my kitchen every Sunday while we wash dishes," Isabella said bluntly. "Because you haven't smiled at her once tonight. Because you're treating my daughter like a stranger." For a moment, Chad looked stricken, as if Isabella's words had penetrated whatever armor he'd built around his heart. But then his expression hardened again. "Melita has a tendency to dramatize normal marital adjustment," he said. "Not every day can be a honeymoon." Isabella's eyes flashed with anger. "Don't you dare insult my daughter's intelligence. That girl knows the difference between normal marriage problems and whatever this is." Chad stood abruptly. "I think we should go. Early morning tomorrow." The drive home was conducted in complete silence. When they pulled into their driveway, Melita finally spoke. "Are you going to tell me what my mother did to deserve that level of disrespect?" "She was interfering in our marriage." "She was worried about her daughter," Melita shot back. "She was asking the questions I should be asking, but I'm too afraid of the answers." "What questions?" "Like whether you still love me," Melita said, tears flowing freely. "Like whether you regret marrying me, like whether you've decided that 10 years of trying for a baby is enough, and you want out." Chad's head snapped toward her. "Melita, because if that's what this is," she continued, "if you've changed your mind about us, then just tell me. Don't torture me with this slow death." "I haven't changed my mind about anything," Chad said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Then why do I feel like I'm losing you more each day? Why do I go to bed wondering if this will be the night you finally tell me you want a divorce?" Chad got out of the car without another word and walked into the house, leaving her alone in the darkness. That night, Chad didn't come to bed at all. Melita found him the next morning asleep on his study couch, surrounded by financial reports, still wearing yesterday's clothes. The crisis came when Dr. Patricia Valdez called to say Chad had canceled his therapy indefinitely. "I was afraid of that," Dr. Valdez said when Melita expressed her shock. "He's been dealing with significant stressors lately. He needs support more than ever." "He won't talk to me," Melita whispered. "I don't know how to help him if he won't let me in." "Keep trying. Don't give up on him even when he's pushing you away." That evening, Melita prepared Chad's favorite dinner and set up a romantic table in their gazebo. When Chad came home late, as had become his pattern, she was waiting. "I made dinner," she said simply. "Will you eat with me?" Chad looked at her for a long moment. "I'm not really hungry." "Chad, please, 5 minutes. Just sit with me for 5 minutes." Something in her voice made Chad nod reluctantly. They sat at the small table without making eye contact. "Do you remember our first night in this gazebo?" Melita asked. "Vaguely." The casual dismissal of one of their most treasured memories felt like a slap. You told me you wanted to grow old with me here, watching our grandchildren play. That was a long time ago. It was 6 months ago. 6 months ago, you still believed in our future together. Chad finally looked at her, and the pain in his eyes was so intense it made her gasp. Maybe I was naive 6 months ago. About what? About us? About love? About everything, Chad said, his voice barely above a whisper. About thinking that good things last, that love is enough, that some people get to be happy. Melita reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. To her surprise, he didn't pull away. Baby, what happened? What changed? Please, just tell me what's wrong and let me help you. For a moment, Chad's fingers tightened around hers, and Melita thought she'd finally broken through. His mouth opened as if he was about to speak. But then his phone buzzed. When he glanced at it, his entire body went rigid. She watched his face transform from pain to terror to cold resolve. I have to take this, he said, standing abruptly. Chad, no. Whatever it is, it can wait. We're talking. Some things can't wait, Chad said, his voice returning to the cold tone that had become his default. Not everything revolves around your need for constant emotional processing. The cruelty of the comment left Melita speechless. She watched him walk away, phone pressed to his ear, leaving her alone with the ruins of her romantic gesture. That night, lying alone while Chad paced in his study, Melita made a decision. If her husband wouldn't tell her what was destroying their marriage, she would find out herself. She would fight for their love even if he wouldn't. But as she drifted off to sleep, Melita couldn't shake the feeling that she was already too late, that whatever poison had infected Chad's heart had already done irreversible damage. The man upstairs might still be her husband on paper, but the Chad Norman who had promised her forever was disappearing more each day. Chapter 6. The Point of No Return. The second letter arrived on a Monday morning in March, exactly 15 years to the day after Chad and Melita had exchanged their first kiss in the hotel garden. This time, Vincent Norman didn't bother with subtlety or corporate letterhead. The message was delivered by his personal assistant, a cold-eyed woman who handed Chad the envelope in the lobby of Norman Industries and waited while he read it, as if to ensure his compliance. Time's up, the letter read in Vincent's harsh scrawl. Your year of grace has expired with no results to show for it. As promised, you are hereby removed from all positions within Norman Industries, effective immediately. Your inheritance has been revoked, and all family assets are now beyond your reach. You have 48 hours to clean out your office before security escorts you from the building. Perhaps this failure will teach you that some things matter more than your sentimental attachment to a barren woman. Vincent Norman. Chad's hands didn't shake this time. The months of living with Vincent's threat had prepared him for this moment, but knowing it was coming didn't make the words any less devastating. 15 years of building the company, of proving himself worthy of the Norman legacy, erased with a few lines of venomous ink. But it was the phrase barren woman that ignited something murderous in Chad's chest. Vincent could destroy Chad's career, steal his inheritance, and strip away every material thing he'd ever worked for, but attacking Melita crossed a line that would never be forgiven. Sir? The assistant's voice seemed to come from very far away. Mr. Norman is expecting a response. Chad looked up at the woman who had just delivered the death blow to his professional life, and for the first time in months, his voice was steady and clear. Tell my father that I've received his message, and tell him that if he ever refers to my wife in such terms again, he'll discover exactly what kind of man he raised. The assistant's eyebrows rose slightly at the threat, but she simply nodded and walked away, her heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown timer. Chad stood in the lobby for a long moment, watching employees rush past him toward elevators that would soon be forbidden to him, toward offices he would never see again. He should have felt devastated. 15 years of his life had just been erased with the stroke of a pen. But instead, Chad felt something he hadn't experienced in months: clarity. Vincent's ultimatum had forced him to choose between his inheritance and his wife, and in trying to protect both, he'd nearly lost the only thing that truly mattered. The irony wasn't lost on him. In his desperation to save his marriage from his father's threats, he'd been destroying it himself. In trying to shield Melita from Vincent's poison, he'd been poisoning their relationship with his own fear and withdrawal. But now the choice had been made for him. Vincent had played his final card, and Chad was free to respond with the truth he should have shared months ago. He drove home in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon for the first time in their marriage, his mind racing with plans for how to explain, how to apologize, how to begin rebuilding what his fear had nearly demolished. Melita would be at the foundation until evening, but Chad needed these hours to prepare, to figure out how to tell his wife that they were about to lose everything except each other. The house felt different as he walked through rooms that would soon belong to someone else. Vincent owned the mortgage, held the deed, controlled every aspect of their material life. Within weeks, they would be starting over with nothing but their love and whatever small savings Melita had kept in her own accounts. Chad found himself in their bedroom, staring at the framed photo from their wedding day that sat on Melita's nightstand. The couple in the picture looked so young, so certain that love could conquer anything. Chad traced Melita's face with his finger, remembering the promises they'd made to each other under the Bali sun. "I'm so sorry," he whispered to the photograph. "I'm so sorry I forgot how to choose you." But even as Chad planned his confession, Vincent was executing the cruelest phase of his revenge. The first call came at 3:30 p.m., Melita's panicked voice through the car speakers as Chad drove to the bank to understand the extent of their financial devastation. "Chad, where are you? I just got a call from our mortgage company saying we're in default and they're starting foreclosure proceedings. They said all accounts associated with Norman Industries have been frozen." "I'm on my way home," Chad said, his stomach dropping as he realized Vincent wasn't content to simply fire him. He was going to systematically destroy every aspect of their life together. "Don't panic, baby. We'll figure this out." "Figure what out?" "Chad, what's happening? Why would our mortgage company—" The line went quiet for a moment, and Chad could hear voices in the background. "Oh my God, Chad, there are reporters outside my office building. They're asking about Norman Industries and whether it's true that you've been embezzling money." "What?" Chad nearly swerved into oncoming traffic. "Melita, listen to me very carefully. Do not talk to any reporters. Do not say anything to anyone. Come straight home and I'll explain everything." "Explain what? Chad, you're scaring me." "I know, baby. I know, and I'm sorry. Just come home. Please." The next few hours passed in a blur of increasingly devastating phone calls. Their credit cards were canceled. Their country club membership was revoked. The charity board that Melita served on requested her immediate resignation due to potential conflicts of interest. Most cruelly of all, the foundation Melita had built for couples struggling with infertility was suddenly under investigation for financial irregularities that Chad knew Vincent had manufactured. By the time Melita arrived home, Chad was sitting in their living room surrounded by legal documents and financial statements, trying to piece together the full scope of his father's revenge. She walked through the door like a woman in shock, her usually vibrant energy replaced by a hollow confusion that made Chad's heart shatter. "The reporters followed me home," she said quietly, setting her purse down with trembling hands. "They're camped outside our gates, asking about embezzlement and fraud and—" Her voice broke. "Chad, they're saying you stole money from children's charities." "I didn't steal anything," Chad said, standing to pull her into his arms. But Melita stepped back, and the distance between them felt like an ocean. Then why are they saying you did? Why is our entire life falling apart in one afternoon? Why are you home in the middle of the day instead of at work? Chad took a deep breath, steeling himself for the conversation that would either save or end his marriage. Because I was fired today, stripped of everything. My position, my inheritance, my access to family money. All of it. Melita stared at him for a long moment, her dark eyes searching his face for answers to questions she didn't know how to ask. Why? Because I refused to meet his deadline. What deadline? Chad, what are you talking about? So Chad told her everything. About Vincent's letter on their anniversary, about the ultimatum to produce an heir within a year, about the months of panic attacks and the impossible choice between protecting their marriage and preserving their financial security. He told her about the therapy sessions he'd stopped attending because facing his own fear felt like admitting weakness. He told her about the distance he'd created between them, the cruel words he'd spoken, the way he'd nearly destroyed their love in his desperate attempt to save it. You knew about this for 10 months, Melita said when he finished, her voice dangerously quiet. For 10 months you let me think I was losing my mind, that our marriage was dying, that you'd stopped loving me. I was trying to protect you. Protect me? Melita's voice rose to a pitch Chad had never heard before. You were protecting me by making me feel like I was married to a stranger, by treating me like I was the enemy instead of your partner. I was scared. We were supposed to be scared together, Melita exploded, tears streaming down her face. That's what marriage means, Chad. That's what, for better or worse, means. You don't get to decide unilaterally to handle things alone. Chad reached for her again, but she moved away, putting the coffee table between them like a barrier. Melita, please. I know I handled this wrong. I know I hurt you. But we can get through this together. We can start over. Start over? Melita laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Chad, you just told me that everything we've built together, our home, our financial security, our reputation, is gone because you chose to lie to me instead of trusting me. You chose to protect your father's ultimatum instead of protecting our marriage. That's not... It is exactly what you did, Melita said, her voice breaking with exhaustion and betrayal. For 10 months, I've been trying to save a marriage while you've been sabotaging it from the inside. I've been fighting for us while you've been fighting against your own fear instead of sharing it with me. The truth of her words hit Chad like a physical blow. She was right. In his desperation to protect their love from external threats, he'd become the threat himself. His father's poison had worked exactly as intended, turning Chad into the instrument of his own marriage's destruction. I love you, he said desperately. Melita, I love you more than my own life. Everything I did was because I couldn't bear the thought of losing you. But you did lose me, Melita whispered, her hand moving unconsciously to cover her heart. You lost me the moment you decided I couldn't handle the truth. You lost me when you chose fear over faith, secrets over trust. The silence that followed was filled with the sound of their dreams crashing down around them. Chad looked at his wife, the woman who had taught him to believe in love, who had spent 10 years healing his wounded heart, and saw a stranger, not because she had changed, but because he had broken something fundamental between them. What happens now? He asked quietly. Melita wiped her tears with the back of her hand, and when she looked at him, Chad saw something that terrified him more than his father's threats ever had: resignation. Now I need you to leave, she said. I need space to think, to process what you've told me, to figure out how to rebuild my life from the ashes of everything I thought I knew. Leave? Melita, this is our home. This was our home, she corrected, before you let your father destroy it. before you decided our marriage wasn't strong enough to survive the truth." Chad felt the last piece of his heart shatter as he looked around the living room where they'd shared so many happy moments. In trying to save everything, he'd lost it all, and the worst part was knowing he had no one to blame but himself. "How long?" he asked. "How long do I stay away?" "I don't know," Melita said honestly. "I don't know if I can forgive this, Chad. I don't know if we can come back from this much damage." As Chad packed a bag in their bedroom, his hands shook with something that went beyond fear into pure terror. He was losing the only thing that had ever mattered to him, and this time there was no amount of money or power that could fix what he'd broken. He paused at Melita's nightstand, looking again at their wedding photo. The man in the picture had promised to choose love over fear, trust over control, vulnerability over self-protection. Chad had broken every one of those promises, and now he was living with the consequences. "I'll find a way to fix this," he said as he stood in their bedroom doorway, bag in hand. "I'll find a way to earn your trust back." Melita didn't turn around from where she stood at their window, looking out at the garden where they'd once planted dreams together. "Don't make promises you can't keep," she said softly. "You've already broken enough of those." As Chad drove away from the house that was no longer his home, toward a future that no longer included the woman he loved, he finally understood the true cost of his father's revenge. Vincent hadn't just taken away Chad's inheritance, he'd stolen his ability to believe that love could conquer fear. But as the reporter's cameras flashed through his car windows and the gates of his former life closed behind him, Chad made one final promise. This time not to Melita, but to himself. He would find a way to become the man she deserved, even if she was no longer there to witness his transformation. The only question was whether it would be too late. Chapter 7. When Love Lies Bleeding. The courthouse on that gray April morning felt like a mausoleum where love went to die. Melita sat in the gallery behind the plaintiff's table, her hands folded in her lap, with a composure that had taken every ounce of her strength to maintain. Beside her, Christy Woolard squeezed her shoulder, offering silent support as they waited for the proceedings that would legally end the greatest love story of Melita's life. 3 weeks had passed since Chad moved out of their home, 3 weeks during which Melita had oscillated between rage and devastation, between wanting to forgive him and wanting to never see his face again. The media circus had been relentless, with reporters camping outside her mother's house, where she'd taken refuge, spinning stories about the Norman Empire scandal and the charity heiress whose husband stole from children. None of it was true. The investigation into Chad's business practices had found no evidence of wrongdoing, and the financial irregularities at Melita's foundation had been traced back to Vincent Norman's deliberate sabotage. But the damage to their reputations had been done, and the stress of living under constant scrutiny had taken its toll on Melita's already fragile emotional state. "You don't have to do this," Christy whispered as the bailiff called for order. "It's not too late to change your mind." Melita shook her head, her eyes fixed on the back of Chad's head where he sat at the defendant's table with his attorney. He hadn't tried to contact her since moving out, respecting her request for space even though she could see the cost of that distance in the hollow look in his eyes, the weight he'd lost, the way his expensive suits now hung loose on his diminished frame. "Yes, I do," Melita replied quietly. "I can't live in limbo anymore, wondering if he'll choose fear over love the next time life gets difficult. I can't build a future with someone who's already proven he'll abandon our partnership when things get hard." Judge Rafael Mendoza entered the courtroom with the weary air of a man who had presided over too many broken dreams. He was known for his attempts to reconcile couples before granting divorces, for his belief that marriage was a sacred institution worth fighting for. But as he looked over the case file, his expression suggested he understood this was a battle already lost. "This is the matter of Cyril Norman versus..." Norman, he began, his voice carrying through the nearly empty courtroom. A petition for dissolution of marriage filed by Mrs. Melita Cyril Norman against Mr. Chad Norman after 15 years of marriage. 15 years. The number hung in the air like an accusation. 15 years of building a life together, reduced to legal terminology and property division spreadsheets. Chad's attorney, a sharp-suited woman named Amanda Pierce, stood to present their response to the divorce petition. Your Honor, my client does not contest this divorce, but he wishes to make a statement to the court regarding the circumstances that led to these proceedings. Judge Mendoza looked surprised. Mr. Norman, you understand that anything you say will become part of the court record and may be used in the determination of asset division and other matters. Chad stood slowly, his hands trembling as he faced the judge. I understand, Your Honor, but there are things that need to be said, consequences I need to accept, and apologies that need to be made on the record. Proceed. Chad turned slightly, his eyes finding Melita's across the courtroom. The love in his gaze was unmistakable, but it was accompanied by such profound regret that Melita felt her carefully constructed composure begin to crack. Your Honor, Chad began, his voice stronger than Melita had heard it in months. My wife is divorcing me because I failed her in every way a husband can fail the woman he loves. I allowed fear to poison our marriage, chose secrecy over trust, and became the very thing I'd spent years in therapy learning not to be. The courtroom was silent except for the soft scratching of the court reporter's fingers on her machine. Even Judge Mendoza leaned forward, clearly intrigued by this unexpected confession. For 10 months, I hid from my wife the fact that my father was threatening to disown me unless we produced an heir within a year. Instead of sharing this burden with my partner, I retreated into old patterns of emotional withdrawal and self-protection that nearly destroyed the most beautiful thing in my life. Melita's breath caught as Chad continued, his voice breaking with emotion. My wife fought for our marriage while I sabotaged it from within. She offered me her trust, her support, her unwavering love, and I repaid her with coldness, cruelty, and lies of omission. Mr. Norman, Judge Mendoza interrupted gently, while I appreciate your honesty, I should inform you that anything you say here today will likely be used against me in the asset division. Yes, sir, I understand. But, Your Honor, I need her to know, I need everyone to know that Melita Cyril Norman is the most extraordinary woman I've ever known, and if this marriage ends today, it's because I wasn't worthy of the love she gave me. Tears were streaming down Melita's face now, and she felt Christie grip her hand tightly. Every word Chad spoke was truth, but hearing him acknowledge his failures publicly didn't erase the months of pain he'd caused. I'm not fighting this divorce, Chad continued, because I respect my wife's right to choose a life free from the damage I've caused. But I want the record to show that she is blameless in the destruction of our marriage. Every asset we accumulated during our 15 years together should go to her, because she's the one who built our life while I was busy tearing it down. Mr. Norman, his attorney began, clearly alarmed by his financial self-sabotage. No, Chad said firmly. This is what honor looks like. This is what love looks like when it's too late to save what you've destroyed, but not too late to do the right thing. Judge Mendoza studied Chad for a long moment, then turned his attention to Melita. Mrs. Cyril Norman, would you like to address the court? Melita stood on unsteady legs, her heart hammering as she faced the man she'd loved for half her adult life. Your Honor, my husband, my soon-to-be ex-husband, is right about many things. He did withdraw from our marriage when I needed him most. He did choose fear over faith, secrecy over partnership. Chad's face crumpled as he heard her confirm his worst fears about their relationship. But, Melita continued, her voice growing stronger, he's wrong about one thing. I'm not blameless in this divorce. I'm guilty of loving him so completely that I enabled his retreat by not demanding better. I'm guilty of making excuses for his behavior instead of insisting he face his demons with me beside him. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath as Melita looked directly at Chad. I loved you enough to fight for us, but not enough to refuse to let you fight alone. I should have cornered you months ago, demanded the truth, refused to accept your withdrawal as inevitable. Melita, Chad whispered, his voice barely audible. But love isn't always enough, she continued, tears flowing freely now. Love without trust is just longing. Love without communication is just hope. And love without the courage to be vulnerable together is just heartbreak. She turned back to Judge Mendoza. I'm requesting this divorce not because I don't love my husband, but because I finally understand that loving him means refusing to enable his self-destruction. Maybe losing everything will teach him what I couldn't. That fear is a choice, and love requires courage every single day. Judge Mendoza was quiet for several minutes, clearly moved by the raw honesty of both parties. Finally, he spoke. In 30 years on this bench, I've rarely seen two people who clearly love each other as much as you two do. Mrs. Cyril Norman, are you absolutely certain this is what you want? Melita closed her eyes, feeling the weight of 15 years of marriage pressing down on her shoulders. In her mind, she saw flashes of their beautiful beginning. Chad learning Spanish to speak to her heart, their wedding in Bali, the mango tree they'd planted together, the gazebo where they'd dreamed of their children playing. But she also saw the months of coldness, the way Chad had looked through her instead of at her, the careful distance he'd maintained even when they were in the same room. She thought of the trust that had been broken, the partnership that had been abandoned, the communication that had been replaced by silence and secrets. Yes, Your Honor, she said finally. I'm certain. Very well. Given that both parties consent to this dissolution and Mr. Norman has waived his rights to marital assets, I hereby grant the petition for divorce. This marriage is dissolved effective immediately. The gavel fell with a sound like thunder, and Melita felt something fundamental shift inside her chest. She was no longer Mrs. Chad Norman. She was no longer half of a couple that had once believed they were destined for forever. She was simply Melita Cyril again, alone and free and utterly heartbroken. Chad remained seated at the defendant's table as people began filing out of the courtroom, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Melita watched him for a moment, memorizing the sight of the man who had been her whole world for 15 years, knowing this might be the last time she ever saw him. Mel, Christie said softly, we should go. The reporters are probably waiting outside. But as they reached the courtroom doors, Melita heard her name called. She turned to see Chad standing behind her, his face ravaged by grief, but his eyes clearer than they'd been in months. Melita, wait, please. She stopped, her hand on the door handle, but didn't turn around. What, Chad? I need you to know that loving you was the best thing I ever did, and losing you is the worst. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to become the man you deserve to marry. Melita felt her knees buckle, and she had to grip the doorframe to stay upright. Chad. I'm not asking for another chance, he said quickly. I know I destroyed that possibility. I just needed you to know that every day we were together was a gift I didn't deserve, and every day without you will be a reminder of what I threw away. Melita turned around slowly, taking in the sight of Chad Norman, no longer the billionaire CEO who had swept her off her feet at a charity gala, but a broken man who finally understood the true cost of choosing fear over love. Goodbye, Chad, she whispered. Goodbye, mi amor, he replied, using the Spanish endearment that had always been reserved for their most intimate moments. Melita walked out of the courthouse and into the bright Miami sunshine, officially divorced and completely devastated. The reporters shouted questions at her, cameras flashed, and microphones were thrust in her face. But she moved through the chaos like a woman in a dream. It wasn't until she was safely in Christie's car, driving away from the courthouse and the ruins of her marriage, that the full impact hit her. She doubled over with a sob so deep it seemed to come from the very core of her being, grieving not just for what she'd lost, but for what might have been if Chad had found the courage to trust her with his fears. "It's over," she gasped between sobs. "It's really over." "I know, honey," Christie said, pulling over to hold her best friend as she fell apart. "I know." But even as Melita wept for the end of her fairy tale marriage, neither she nor Chad could have imagined that in a sterile hospital room across town, Dr. Lucia Morales was reviewing test results that would change everything they thought they knew about their future. 3 hours after a judge dissolved their marriage, a lab technician was about to discover that Melita Cyril was 6 weeks pregnant with Chad Norman's child. Chapter 8. The Price of Pride. Doctor. Lucia Morales had delivered life-changing news to thousands of patients, but she'd never had to call a woman 3 hours after her divorce to tell her she was carrying her ex-husband's child. The irony was almost cruel enough to make her question fate's twisted sense of humor. Melita sat in Isabella's kitchen with swollen eyes and cold tea when her phone rang. She almost didn't answer, assuming it was another reporter. But Dr. Morales's name made her stomach lurch. "Dr. Morales, is everything all right? I have the results from last week's blood work when you came in feeling dizzy and nauseous. Melita, I need you to sit down." "I'm already sitting. What is it?" "You're expecting a baby?" The words hung in the air like an impossible equation. Melita could hear Dr. Morales continuing, something about being 6 weeks along, prenatal vitamins, follow-up appointments, but the words seemed distant. "That's not possible," Melita whispered. "Chad and we haven't been intimate in weeks. We've been trying for years." "According to the blood work, conception occurred around 6 weeks ago. Was there any intimacy during that time?" Melita closed her eyes, forcing herself to remember. 6 weeks ago, the night before Chad moved out. The night they'd made love with desperate passion that felt like goodbye. She'd been so consumed with their crumbling marriage that she hadn't noticed her missed period. "Oh my God," she breathed, the phone slipping from nerveless fingers. Isabella rushed over as Melita began hyperventilating. "Mija, what's wrong?" Melita couldn't speak, couldn't process the cosmic joke that had just upended her future. She was expecting. After 15 years of trying, it had finally happened, 3 hours too late to save her marriage. Isabella picked up the phone, speaking with Dr. Morales, while Melita's world spun out of control. After hanging up, Isabella took her daughter's hands. "This is still a blessing, regardless of the circumstances," she said gently. 15 years, Mama," Melita whispered. 15 years of wanting this. And now you're carrying Chad's child, the baby you both wanted desperately. The baby that might have saved our marriage if it had come sooner. If I'd known this morning, before the divorce." "Would it have changed anything?" Isabella asked carefully. "Would the baby have fixed the problems that drove you apart?" Melita considered seriously. Would it have? Or would Chad's fears have simply taken a different form? "I don't know," she admitted. "Maybe we would have stayed together for the wrong reasons. And now? Now I have to figure out how to raise Chad's child without Chad. I have to tell him he's going to be a father." The thought of calling Chad, sharing this news with the man who had just walked out of her life, was overwhelming, but keeping his child a secret was unthinkable. 3 days passed before Melita found the courage to call. She'd worked through her emotions with Christy and her therapist, slowly accepting that her life was about to change in ways she'd dreamed of, but never under these circumstances. Chad answered on the second ring, his voice hoarse. "Melita, Is everything okay? Just hearing his voice made her heart clench. I need to see you. There's something I have to tell you. Of course. Where? The gazebo. Can you meet me there in an hour? The house is yours now, Melita. I can't just... Please, this is about both of us. A pause, then quietly. I'll be there. The drive to their former home was surreal. Everything looked the same, but felt like a museum of a life that no longer existed. Chad was waiting in the gazebo, looking terrible, thinner, disheveled, his suit wrinkled. He looked heartbroken. You look beautiful, Chad said softly. You always look beautiful. They sat in awkward silence, hyper-aware of the space between them, a space that felt like an ocean of hurt. Just tell me, Chad said quietly. Whatever it is, I can handle it. I'm pregnant. Chad's face went completely white. For a moment, she thought he might faint. Pregnant, he repeated slowly, as if translating a foreign language. 6 weeks. It happened the night before you moved out. The night we said goodbye. Oh my God, Melita, we're going to have a baby. I'm going to have a baby, she corrected firmly. You made your choice. You walked away from our marriage. I won't force you to be involved. Chad's head snapped up, eyes blazing. Force me? This is our baby. The baby we've wanted for 15 years. How could you think I wouldn't want to be involved? Because you've spent the last year proving that when things get difficult, you retreat instead of fighting. When our marriage got hard, you decided it was easier to destroy it than save it. Each word hit Chad like a blow, but he didn't deny them. They were all true. You're right, he said finally. I failed you in every way. But, Melita, please, don't let my mistakes cost them a father. I would never do that, but I won't pretend co-parenting will be easy after everything that's happened. I won't pretend I trust you not to walk away again. Chad slid off the bench onto his knees before her, reaching for her hands before stopping himself. I know I don't have the right to ask for your trust, but I swear I will never walk away from our child. Never. And what about me? The question slipped out before she could stop herself. Chad's face crumpled. We're divorced, Melita. You made that choice. I did, and I meant it. But that was before this changed everything. What are you saying? I'm saying I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to raise a child with someone I still love but can't trust. I don't know how to protect my heart while sharing the most important thing in my life with the man who broke it. Chad closed his eyes, and when he opened them, they were filled with determination. Then let me prove I've changed. Let me show you that the man who was too afraid to trust you is gone. How? However you need me to. Therapy, counseling, whatever it takes. I'll become the man our child deserves as a father, and the man you deserved as a husband. We're divorced, Chad. There's no going back. I'm not asking to go back. I'm asking for the chance to go forward, not as husband and wife, but as two people who love each other enough to put their child first. Melita was quiet for a long time, her hand resting on her stomach. Finally, she spoke. I have conditions. Anything. You see Dr. Valdez again, regularly. You don't make decisions about the baby without consulting me. You don't override my choices because you have more money. Agreed. And Chad, if you ever shut me out again, if you ever choose to handle something alone instead of trusting me, I will disappear so completely that the only way you'll know your child exists is through court-ordered support payments. The threat was delivered calmly, but Chad heard the steel beneath her words. I understand. And Melita, thank you. Thank you for not keeping this from me. Don't thank me yet, Melita said, standing to leave. Thank me in 18 years if I've managed to raise a child who's proud to call you Dad. As she walked away, Chad remained kneeling where they'd once dreamed of the family they were now going to have under circumstances neither could have imagined. He'd lost his wife but gained the opportunity to become a father. Now he had to prove he was worthy of both gifts, even if he could only claim one. The baby they'd prayed for was finally coming. Whether their love could survive long enough to welcome that child into a family worth belonging to remained to be seen. Chapter 9. A Father's Awakening. The phone call came at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in December, 6 months after their divorce was finalized. Chad had been lying awake in his small apartment, thinking about their anniversary, when his phone buzzed with an unknown number. "Hello?" he answered groggily. "Mr. Norman, this is Dr. Martinez at Jackson Memorial Hospital. I'm calling because you're listed as the emergency contact for Melita Cyril." Chad shot upright. "Is she all right? What happened?" "She's in labor, Mr. Norman. She asked me to call you." "Labor?" Chad's world tilted. "I'm sorry, I think there's been a mistake." "How?" "Sir, Miss Cyril is currently giving birth to your son. She's been asking for you for the past hour. Can you come to the hospital?" Chad was already reaching for his clothes. "My son." "Room number?" "Room 314 in the maternity ward. Please hurry." The drive to Jackson Memorial was a blur of red lights and disbelief. At the nurse's station, a kind-faced woman looked up with recognition. "You must be Mr. Norman. I'm Sarah, Miss Cyril's nurse. She's been asking for you." "I don't understand what's happening," Chad said, his voice tight with emotion. "The baby was conceived before your divorce, Mr. Norman. Miss Cyril is about to deliver a healthy baby boy. She's been in labor for 14 hours, but she's doing beautifully." Sarah led him down a hallway past rooms full of new families. "Before you go in, I need you to know that Ms. Cyril made it clear she doesn't expect anything from you. She said you have the right to know about your son, but no obligation to be involved. She just wanted you here for his birth." Chad's throat tightened. Even now, Melita was protecting his right to choose without pressuring him. "Can I see her?" The woman in the hospital bed was simultaneously the Melita he'd known and someone transformed. Her hair was pulled back, her face flushed from hours of labor, but when she looked up and saw him, her face lit up with the same radiant smile that had captivated him 16 years ago. "Chad," she whispered, tears springing to her eyes. "You came." "Of course I came," he said, rushing to her bedside and taking her hand. "Melita, why didn't you tell me? How long have you known?" "I found out the day we got divorced," she said, squeezing his hand as another contraction hit. 3 hours after the judge signed the papers. "I was going to call you, but then I thought maybe it was better if you didn't know. You'd lost so much already." "Lost?" Chad's voice broke. "Melita, this is our baby. The baby we tried for 15 years. How could you think I wouldn't want to know?" "Because I was scared you'd try to get back together because of the baby, not because you'd figured out how to choose love over fear." Before Chad could respond, Dr. Morales entered with the controlled urgency of imminent birth. "All right, Melita, it's time. Your baby is ready to meet the world." What followed was the most extraordinary experience of Chad's life. He held Melita's hand as she pushed their son into existence, whispering words of encouragement that came from the deepest part of his soul. When the doctor finally placed their baby on Melita's chest, Chad felt something fundamental shift inside him. "Oh my God," he breathed, staring at the tiny boy who carried his eyes and Melita's nose. "He's real." "Gavin," Melita whispered, tears streaming down her face. "His name is Gavin Cyril." "Gavin," Chad repeated, reaching out with one trembling finger to touch his son's impossibly small hand. "Hello, Gavin. I'm your daddy." The next few hours passed in a haze of wonder. Chad watched nurses clean and measure Gavin as Melita attempted her first feeding, as their son slept peacefully in the hospital bassinet. He called no one, simply existed in this new reality where he was a father. "Chad," Melita said softly when they were finally alone, "I need you to understand something. This doesn't change anything between us. I'm not asking you to come back." Chad looked up from where he'd been staring at Gavin's sleeping face. "What are you asking?" "I'm asking if you want to be his father. Really be his father. Not just write checks or visit on weekends, but be present, be involved. And us." Melita's expression grew sad but resolute. "There is no us, Chad. We're Gavin's parents, but we're not a couple. We can't go back to what we were before." Chad felt his heart break all over again, but he nodded, understanding. "I want to be his father. I want to be the man he can count on. But Melita, I need you to know, seeing you today, seeing what you've gone through to bring our son into the world, I love you more now than I ever have." "Chad, I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "I know I destroyed our marriage, but I need you to know that every day since our divorce, I've been working to become the man you deserve to marry. I've been in therapy. I've started teaching at an inner-city school. I've cut ties with my father completely." Melita studied his face, seeing changes she hadn't noticed in the excitement of Gavin's birth. Chad looked older, but somehow lighter. The haunted look from their marriage's final months was gone. "Why?" she asked simply. "Because loving you taught me who I could be at my best, and losing you taught me who I never want to be again. Because I want our son to be proud of his father. Because I finally understand that healing isn't something you do for someone else, it's something you do for yourself." Over the following months, Chad threw himself into fatherhood with complete dedication. He learned to change diapers, to swaddle Gavin for sleep, to recognize different cries. He read parenting books obsessively, researched car seat safety, and moved to an apartment closer to Melita's townhouse. They established routines and boundaries, shared custody schedules and emergency protocols. Chad came for regular Tuesday dinners, bringing educational toys and organic food. "You don't have to try so hard," Melita told him one evening as he arrived armed with supplies for their 6-month-old. "I want to get it right," Chad said, settling Gavin on his lap. "I want to be the father he deserves." "You already are," Melita said softly. "Look at him when you're here. He lights up the moment he sees you." Chad looked down at Gavin, who was beaming up at him with a toothless grin. "I just don't want to mess this up the way I messed up our marriage." "This is different," Melita said. "You're different. The man who was too afraid to trust me with his fears would never have shown up at the hospital that night." As the months passed, Chad began to understand what healing really meant. Every day with Gavin taught him about patience, about unconditional love, about showing up consistently. Every interaction with Melita reminded him of the man he'd been when their love was fearless. He started writing letters to Gavin, filled with promises about the kind of father he was committed to being, and hopes for the man his son would become. "My beautiful boy," he wrote one evening after Gavin had fallen asleep in his arms. "Your mama and I couldn't stay married, but please don't think that means we don't love you with everything we have. Sometimes love isn't enough to fix what fear has broken, but it's always enough to build something new and beautiful." As Gavin's first birthday approached, Chad found himself thinking about the future, not just his son's future, but his own. He'd spent the past year focused on being the best father and co-parent possible, but lately he'd been feeling something he hadn't experienced since his divorce. Hope. Hope that maybe the man he'd become through loving his son was finally worthy of the woman who'd given him the greatest gift of his life. Hope that Melita might someday see past his mistakes to the person he'd fought to become. But Chad had learned that hope without action was just wishful thinking. If he wanted a chance to prove he'd truly changed, he would need more than just being a good father. He would need to find the courage to fight for love one more time. Chapter 10. Love's Greatest Victory. 10 years had passed since Gavin Cyril took his first breath, and Chad Norman had spent every single day proving that some men can change, that love can triumph over fear, and that the greatest victories sometimes come disguised as devastating defeats. The Miami Botanical Garden was alive with children's laughter as Gavin's 10th birthday party reached its crescendo. Chad watched from the edge of the celebration, his heart full as he observed his son, confident, intelligent, radiating the same joyful energy that had always made Melita light up every room. Gavin was surrounded by friends from school, cousins from Melita's extended family, and the makeshift family that had formed around their unconventional situation. Isabella Cruz presided over the cake table like the proud grandmother she'd become, while Christy Woolard organized games with practiced efficiency. But Chad's eyes kept finding Melita. At 38, she was even more beautiful than the woman who had rejected his charity donation 16 years ago. Motherhood had given her a grace that made her absolutely luminous, and the years of rebuilding her life had created an inner strength visible in every gesture. She wore a simple yellow sundress that brought out the golden highlights in her dark skin, her natural hair adorned with small braids Gavin had helped create that morning. She moved through the party with easy warmth, making sure every child felt included, every moment infused with love. "Dad," Gavin's voice called across the garden, "come help me with the piñata." Chad jogged over to where Gavin stood beneath a rainbow-colored soccer ball piñata. At 10, Gavin was tall for his age, with Chad's gray eyes and Melita's infectious smile. But more importantly, he possessed a confidence that Chad envied. "Need me to lift you up, buddy?" Chad asked. "Dad, I'm 10 now," Gavin said with exaggerated patience. "I can reach it myself. But I want you to help me make sure all the little kids get a turn first." Chad felt his chest swell with pride. This was who Gavin was: thoughtful, inclusive, always considering others. Whatever mistakes Chad had made, he and Melita had somehow raised a son who embodied the best of both of them. As Gavin organized his guests with natural leadership, Chad felt Melita at his side. "He's incredible," she said softly. "He gets that from you," Chad replied, then caught himself. After 10 years of co-parenting, he'd learned to be careful about crossing invisible lines. But Melita smiled. "He gets it from both of us. The good parts, anyway." They stood in comfortable silence, watching their son facilitate turn-taking among 6-year-olds with diplomatic skill. "Melita," Chad said suddenly, "I have something for you." For Gavin, actually, but I wanted to give it to you first. She turned, expression curious but guarded. Over the years, they'd become friends, partners in parenting, people who cared deeply about each other's well-being. But they were also two people who had loved completely and lost that love to fear and poor choices. Chad pulled out a small wrapped box and began speaking words he'd been practicing for months. 10 years ago, you gave me the greatest gift of my life," he said. "Not just Gavin, though he's extraordinary. You gave me the chance to become the father I'd always dreamed of being, and in doing that, helped me become the man I should have been all along." Melita's eyes began to shine with unshed tears, but she remained silent. "I know we can't go back. I know the trust I broke can't be magically repaired. But I wanted you to know that every day for the past 10 years, I've been working to become worthy of the faith you showed in me when you let me be Gavin's father." He handed her the box. She unwrapped it to reveal a simple silver locket with a tiny photo of the three of them from Gavin's first Christmas. Chad and Melita, on either side of their baby son, both glowing with new parent exhaustion and overwhelming love. "It's beautiful," Melita whispered. "But Chad—" "There's more," he said, pulling out an envelope. This is for Gavin, but I wanted you to read it first. Melita opened the envelope to find a letter in Chad's handwriting. My dearest Gavin, today you turn 10 years old, and I am overwhelmed with pride. You are kind without being weak, confident without being arrogant, and loving without reservation. Your mama is the strongest, most beautiful, most extraordinary woman in the world. She carried you in her heart for 15 years before she carried you in her body. If you grow up to be half the person she is, you will change the world. Losing your mama was the biggest mistake of my life, but having you has been my greatest blessing. You taught me what unconditional love looks like. You showed me that being a man isn't about controlling everything. It's about showing up and choosing love even when it's scary. On your 10th birthday, I have one wish, that you always remember you are worthy of love exactly as you are. You are loved simply because you exist, because you are ours, because you are you. Your devoted father, Chad Norman. Melita's hands shook as she finished reading, tears streaming down her face. Chad, she whispered, this is beautiful. But why are you giving this to me? Because I wanted you to know that I finally understand what you tried to tell me in that courtroom 10 years ago. Love isn't about possession or control. It's about wanting someone's happiness, even when it doesn't include you. He paused, watching Gavin help a younger child reach the piñata. I've spent the last 10 years learning to love you the way you deserved all along, without conditions, without expectations, without trying to change you. Chad ... I'm not asking for anything, he said quickly. I'm not trying to win you back. I just needed you to know that you were right to leave me. You were right to demand better. You were right to refuse to settle for a love that was afraid of itself. Melita looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in years. The man before her was recognizable as her former husband, but fundamentally different. The fear that had driven him to withdraw was gone, replaced by something that looked like peace. You really have changed, she said softly. I had the best teacher, Chad replied, his eyes meeting hers with openness that reminded her of the man who had fallen to his knees in a Bali garden. You taught me that love is supposed to make you braver, not more afraid. You taught me that trust is earned through consistency. You taught me that being vulnerable isn't weakness. It's the only path to real connection. Before Melita could respond, Gavin came running over, face flushed with excitement. Mom, Dad, did you see? I got everyone to take turns and nobody cried. We saw, baby, Melita said, scooping him into a hug. You were amazing. Gavin looked between his parents with perceptive eyes. Are you guys okay? You look like you've been crying. Happy tears, Melita said, because we're so proud of you. And because sometimes, Melita said, looking directly at Chad, miracles happen when you least expect them. As the party wound down, Chad helped clean up with easy familiarity. He stacked chairs, collected plates, and supervised Gavin's attempts to save every piece of leftover cake. Chad, Melita said as they loaded decorations into her car, would you like to come back to the house? Gavin wanted to show you his new art project, and I think we should talk. Chad's heart began to race, but he kept his voice steady. I'd like that. At the house, Gavin immediately dragged Chad to his room to show off a painting of their family. 3 figures standing together under a rainbow, holding hands and smiling. It's us, Gavin explained. I painted it for Family Day. Chad's throat tightened. In Gavin's imagination, they were still a unit, still whole despite the divorce and separate houses. It's perfect, Chad said. Can I have it? You can have it, Gavin said generously. I'll make another one for Mom. After Gavin was settled with a movie, Chad and Melita found themselves alone in her kitchen. So, Melita said, leaning against the counter, talk to me. The letter, the locket, the speech about loving without expectations. What are you trying to tell me? Chad took a deep breath. I'm trying to tell you that I'm still in love with you. I've been in love with you every day for the past 10 years. But I finally understand that love isn't about what I want. It's about what's best for you. And what do you think is best for me? Whatever makes you happy, Chad said simply. If that's a life without me romantically, then I'll continue to be the best co-parent I can be. If that's finding someone new, then I'll be genuinely happy for you, even if it kills me inside. And if what makes me happy is giving us another chance. Chad's heart stopped. Is it? Melita moved closer, her dark eyes searching his face. I don't know. 10 years ago, I told you that love without trust was just longing. Do you remember that? Every word. I've watched you for 10 years, Chad. I've seen you show up for Gavin without fail. I've seen you put his needs before your own. I've seen you become the father you always said you wanted to be. Chad held his breath. But more than that, I've seen you become the man I fell in love with in that hotel garden. The man who was brave enough to be vulnerable, honest enough to admit his mistakes, and strong enough to change. Melita, I'm scared, she admitted. I'm scared of getting hurt again. I'm scared of disrupting the life we've built. I'm scared of teaching Gavin that love means you can break someone's heart and expect them to take you back. Then don't, Chad said quietly. Don't take me back because I want you to. Only say yes if you believe we can build something better than what we had before. Melita reached up and touched his face. I do believe that. I believe we're both different people. I believe we've learned things about love and trust that we didn't know before. I believe that maybe we can have the marriage we were always meant to have. Are you saying yes? I'm saying I want to try, Melita said. I want to date you. Really date you, like we're starting over. I want to see if the people we've become can fall in love all over again. Can I kiss you? Chad asked. I thought you'd never ask, Melita laughed, and then they were kissing like teenagers, like newlyweds, like two people who had found their way back through heartbreak and healing. When they broke apart, they heard applause from the doorway. Gavin stood there grinning, looking like a boy whose greatest wish had come true. Does this mean we're gonna be a real family again? He asked hopefully. Chad and Melita looked at each other, then back at their son. We've always been a real family, Melita said gently. But yes, baby, Daddy and I are going to try to be a different kind of family, the kind where everyone lives in the same house again. Gavin whooped with joy and launched himself into their arms, and as Chad held his son and the woman he'd never stopped loving, he understood that sometimes the greatest victories come disguised as devastating defeats. Sometimes you have to lose everything to discover what really matters. Sometimes love requires you to let go before you can truly hold on. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and willing to do the hard work of becoming worthy of your blessings, love gives you a second chance to get it right. As the three of them stood together, laughing and crying and planning their new beginning, Chad thought about the mango tree they'd planted in Bali. It had grown strong and tall, weathered storms and drought, and eventually borne the sweet fruit they'd dreamed of, just like their love.